Hi there, welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're diving into the gnawing reality of medieval peasant life, specifically, what these hard-working folks actually put in their bellies before collapsing into bed each night. Picture this. You're trudging through mud in the fading light, your back screaming from 14 hours of ploughing, and your stomach is staging its own peasant revolt. The Lord's Manor glows warmly in the distance, while you're heading to a drafty hut where dinner might be yesterday's leftovers mixed with whatever didn't rot. Here's a fun reality check. If you were actually transported back to medieval times right now, you'd probably last about 3 days before begging to return to your world of refrigerators and takeout. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. Now, let's drift back in time. The sun is sinking behind the village church, casting long shadows across the muddy paths between thatched roof hovels. You're finally stumbling home, every muscle aching from another day of back-breaking labor in your Lord's fields. Your stomach has been complaining since noon. That small heel of bread and watered ale you called lunch feels like a distant memory now. As you push open the creaking door of your one-room home, the familiar smell of smoke and something vaguely edible greets your nostrils. Your wife is bent over the hearth, stirring that eternal pot that seems to have been bubbling since time began. The children are already gathered around, wooden bowls in hand, their eyes reflecting the orange glow of the fire. This is it, the main event of your day, the meal that needs to fill your belly enough to let you sleep and give you strength for tomorrow's toil. You know better than to expect variety. The medieval peasant's evening meal is a masterclass in monotony, punctuated by seasonal shifts and the occasional windfall. Tonight, like most nights, it'll be pottage, that thick, grainy soup that's part stew, part porridge, and entirely essential to your survival. Your wife ladles out portions, and you notice she's managed to add a few cabbage leaves and what might be a turnip. On good days, there might even be a scrap of bacon fat for flavor, though historians still argue whether the average peasant family could afford meat more than a few times per year. The irony isn't lost on you. You spend your days growing food for others, while your own table remains depressingly sparse. The Lord's Feast Hall, just visible through your window, probably features roasted meats, fine white bread, and exotic spices you've only heard merchants mention. Meanwhile, you're grateful for anything that isn't actively rotting. As you settle onto your rough wooden bench, you reflect on the cruel mathematics of peasant life. You produce the food, but you don't own it. After the Lord takes his share, the church claims its tithe, and the miller takes his cut for grinding your grain. You're left with just enough to keep body and soul together, barely. Some scholars estimate that up to 80% of a peasant's caloric intake came from bread and grain-based foods, making that bubbling pot of pottage quite literally your lifeline. The children eat quickly, efficiently, knowing that dawdling means colder food and angrier parents. There's no conversation about your day. Everyone already knows it was hard, repetitive, and will be exactly the same tomorrow. Instead, you focus on the simple act of eating, of filling the hollow ache in your gut with something warm and substantial. The wooden spoon scrapes against the bottom of your bowl as you chase the last drops of pottage. This stuff, this eternal, ever-present mush, has been the cornerstone of peasant survival for generations. Your grandmother stirred a pot just like this one, and her grandmother before that. Sometimes you swear the pot itself has never been empty, just endlessly replenished with whatever grains, vegetables, and scraps come to hand. You watch your wife add more water to the pot, then a handful of barley. Tomorrow's breakfast is already beginning its slow transformation. The pottage pot is like a culinary time machine, constantly evolving, yet somehow always the same. Medieval food historians call it a perpetual stew, and they're not wrong. Some families boast that their pot hasn't been fully emptied and cleaned in living memory. The base is always grain, barley if you're lucky, oats if you're not, and sometimes a mix of whatever didn't get claimed by the Lord or spoiled in storage. You've learned to read the pot like a fortune teller reads palms. A thick consistency means the harvest was decent. Watery gruel means you're stretching supplies until they scream. The color tells its own story. Grey-brown means pure grain, while flecks of green or orange signal that someone found vegetables to throw in. Tonight's batch has personality. At least, you detect onion, probably the wild ones your daughter gathered near the stream. There's definitely cabbage, and something that might be parsnip, or might be last year's turnip, finally giving up the ghost. The flavor is, well, flavor might be too strong a word. It's sustenance with pretensions. Your youngest son makes a face as he swallows, and you give him a warning look. Complaining about food is a luxury you can't afford. Besides, this pottage is practically gourmet compared to what you ate during last year's bad harvest. Then, you were grinding up acorns and mixing them with the barley, just to make the pot seem fuller. Some families even resorted to adding sawdust, though historians still debate whether that was from desperation or if medieval people knew something about fiber we don't. The consistency tonight is perfect for sopping with bread. Not too thick that it clings like mortar, not so thin it runs through the holes in your wooden bowl. You've become a connoisseur of textures out of necessity. Too thick, and the pottage burns on the bottom, leaving a charred taste that haunts every spoonful. Too thin, and you're hungry again. Within the hour. Your wife mentions that the miller's family has meat in their pottage tonight. She saw the miller's wife buying a ham hock at market. You both know it's because the miller skims extra grain from everyone who uses his mill, the bastard. But you can't grind your own grain. That's illegal. The Lord owns the mill, and you're legally bound to use it and pay for the privilege. It's a perfect system if you're not the one eating watery pottage while smelling your neighbor's ham-scented smoke. Sometimes travelers pass through with tales of city dwellers who eat different meals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The concept seems as foreign as the spices from far-off lands that merchants describe. Your meal schedule is simpler. Pottage when you wake, bread and ale at midday if you're lucky, and pottage again before bed. On Sundays after church, you might add an egg or some cheese. During harvest time, when there's too much work and not enough hours, you might get fresh bread and meat from the Lord's kitchen, payment for working yourself half to death. The scholarly debates about medieval nutrition would make you laugh if you had the energy. Some historians claim peasants ate better than we think, pointing to garden vegetables and foraged foods. Others paint a picture of near-constant malnourishment. Sitting here with your bowl of perpetual stew, you know the truth lies somewhere in between. You're not starving, usually, but you're never quite full either. As you finish scraping your bowl clean, you notice your wife has already begun adding tomorrow's ingredients to the pot. A few pea pods, some wild garlic, and what looks suspiciously like the leafy tops of carrots that should have gone to the Lord's kitchen. She catches your eye and shrugs. What they don't know won't hurt them, and it might just make tomorrow's pottage marginally less monotonous. The fire crackles lower, and you know soon it'll be time for sleep. But for now, You sit with your family around the dying embers, the pot bubbling its eternal rhythm, promising that tomorrow, whatever else it brings, will at least include another bowl of the same. Your attention shifts to the small loaf sitting on the rough wooden table. Bread, the holy grail of peasant existence. It's a dense, dark thing that bears about as much resemblance to the Lord's fine white manchet as you do to him in his silk robes. You break off a piece, and it fights back, requiring real effort to tear through the thick, coarse crust inside. The crumb is heavy and slightly sour, flecked with bits of bran and, if you look closely, probably some grit from the millstones. This is maslin bread, made from a mixture of wheat and rye, though calling it wheat is generous. Your wheat is the stuff that didn't make the cut for the Lord's table, mixed with rye because it grows in soil too poor for anything else. The color tells the whole story of medieval social hierarchy. The whiter the bread, the higher your status. Your bread is so dark it's nearly black, while the Lord dines on bread so white it might as well be made of clouds and privilege. You watch your eldest son carefully portion out tomorrow's bread ration. It's his job now, and the responsibility weighs on his young shoulders like a sack of grain. Each family member gets their allocation, with you receiving the largest piece, not out of favoritism, but cold practicality. You need the strength for tomorrow's labor. Your wife gets the next largest portion, then the children in descending order by age. The youngest gets barely more than a handful, which seems cruel until you remember that his survival depends on yours. The politics of bread in your world would make modern economists weep. You grow the grain, harvest it with your own hands, thresh it until your back screams, and then watch most of it disappear into the Lord's granaries. What remains gets ground at the Lord's mill, for a fee, naturally, and then you're taxed again when you bake it in the Lord's oven. Yes, you're not even allowed to bake your own bread at home. The communal oven is another monopoly, another link in the chain that keeps you perpetually indebted. Sometimes you dream about bread the way other men might dream about women or gold. Not just any bread, but the fine white bread you glimpse once when delivering grain to the manor. Manchet bread, they called it, so soft and white it seemed impossible that it came from the same grain you grow. The baker explained, with obvious disdain for your ignorance, that it's made from flour sifted multiple times through cloth until only the finest particles remain. The bran, the grit, the nutrition, all of it gets sifted out, leaving pure white nothingness that somehow tastes like heaven. Your bread, meanwhile, could double as a weapon. Drop it on someone's foot and you'd break toes, but it fills the belly and, more importantly, it lasts. That hardness you curse when trying to bite through it. That's what keeps it from molding for days or even weeks. You've learned to soften it in your pottage, letting it soak up the liquid until it reaches a consistency your teeth can manage. The children know the bread hierarchy by heart. There's the Lord's manchet, white as snow. Below that, wastel bread for wealthy merchants, still white, but not quite as fine. Then comes cocket, a wheaten bread for the better-off townspeople. Finally, at the bottom, there's your bread, maslin for the luckier peasants, and horse bread for the truly desperate, made from whatever grains, peas, beans, or acorns can be ground into flour. Horse bread is technically meant for horses, but hunger doesn't discriminate. You remember last winter, when even maslin was a luxury. The harvest had been poor, and by February you were mixing ground peas and beans into the flour just to make it stretch. Your wife discovered that acorn flour, if you boiled the acorns first to remove the bitterness, could bulk out the bread without making it completely inedible. Historians still argue whether peasants regularly ate such famine foods, or only in desperate times. Sitting here with your mouth full of gritty, dark bread, you know the answer varies by the season and the cruel whims of weather. There's a rustling at the door, and your neighbour appears, clutching her own small loaf. She wants to trade her bread for some of your pottage. Her husband is sick, she explains, and can't chew the hard crust. You consider the bargain carefully. Bread is currency here, more valuable than the few coins you see in a year. But community matters too, and tomorrow it might be you needing help. You nod, and your wife ladles out a generous portion of pottage in exchange for half her loaf. As the evening deepens, you carefully wrap the remaining bread in cloth. It needs to last 3 more days until baking day comes around again. The Lord's oven fires up twice a week, and missing your slot means going without. You've learned to gauge exactly how much dough to prepare, how long it takes to rise in your cold hut, and how early you need to queue at the oven to ensure your turn. The autumn wind rattles through the gaps in your wattle and daub walls, carrying with it the sweet sour scent of fermenting apples. Your stomach growls with renewed interest as you remember the windfall gathering you did yesterday. Those bruised, bird-pecked apples might not look like much, but they're treasure in your world of scarcity. Nature's gift to peasants who know where to look and when to grab it. You reach for the basket in the corner where you've hoarded your seasonal bounty. September and October are the golden months when your diet briefly escapes its prison of pottage and bread. The Lord can claim the best apples from his orchard, but he can't stop the wind from blowing them into the common lands. Can he? Well, technically he can, and does. But enforcement is another matter entirely when hungry families creep out at dawn to gather nature's charity. Your fingers close around a wrinkled apple, soft in spots but still edible. You bite carefully around the bad parts, savoring the burst of sweetness that floods your mouth. For these few precious weeks, you'll have apples in various states of decay. Fresh ones get eaten immediately. Slightly soft ones go into the pottage for a hint of sweetness. The truly mushy ones get pressed into a crude cider, weak and cloudy, but it keeps longer than the fruit itself. Your wife is already planning ahead, slicing the better apples into rings and hanging them near the fire to dry. Come February, when the world is locked in ice and the root cellar runs low, those leathery apple rings will taste like memories of sunshine. She's learned the exact distance from the flames. Too close and they char. Too far and they rot before drying. It's a delicate dance with preservation that your family's survival depends on. The children have been busy too. Your daughter shows off a pouch full of hazelnuts, gathered from the hedgerows on her way back from gleaning in the harvested fields. Gleaning. Now there's a word that sounds almost pleasant, until you realize it means crawling through stubble on your hands and knees, searching for individual grains the harvesters missed. The Lord graciously allows this, presenting it as charity, when really it's just another way to ensure his fields are picked absolutely clean. Your son contributes a handful of blackberries. His fingers still stain purple-black from picking. They're past their prime, more seed than flesh now, but they'll add variety to tomorrow's pottage. He also mentions seeing mushrooms in the forest, but you shake your head firmly. Mushroom foraging is a gamble you can't afford. One wrong identification and your family starves because you're too dead to work. Let the brave or desperate take that risk. The seasonal feast or famine cycle rules your life with iron predictability. Spring brings wild garlic, nettles carefully handled, and dandelion greens, foods that modern foragers rediscover with excitement, but which for you represent the hungry gap when last year's stores run low and this year's crops haven't arrived. Summer offers wild strawberries if you can beat the birds to them, elderflowers for tea, and various herbs that make pottage slightly less monotonous. But autumn is when nature briefly remembers the poor. Nuts fall from trees, berries ripen on bushes, and even the Lord's strictly guarded orchards can't contain every apple. You've become an expert at reading the signs. Which trees drop their fruit first? Where mushrooms grow, even if you don't dare eat them. And exactly when the hazelnuts reach perfect ripeness. Your wife reminds you about the wild plums she spotted last week. Tomorrow, if the Lord doesn't demand extra labor, you'll send the children to gather them. They'll eat half on the spot. You know it. They know it. Everyone pretends otherwise. But whatever makes it home will be precious. Some will be dried. Some might be traded for a bit of salt or a precious egg. And the rest will disappear into young bellies faster than you can blink. The cruel mathematics of seasonal eating means calculating constantly. How many turnips can you store in the root cellar? How long will the cabbages last if you eat one per week? Can you stretch the dried peas until April? Your wife has developed an almost supernatural ability to estimate food supplies, knowing instinctively that 20 pounds of dried apples, 40 pounds of turnips, and 2 sacks of peas might see your family through to spring. Historians still debate the nutritional value of medieval peasant diets, with some arguing that seasonal variety provided adequate vitamins. They've clearly never tried to convince a 6-year-old that nettle soup is dinner again. Sure, foraged foods add nutrients, but they also add the constant anxiety of never knowing if tomorrow will bring a windfall or another day of watery pottage flavored with hope and wild onions. As darkness deepens, you take one last bite of apple, saving the rest for the children's morning meal. Outside, you can hear other families making their own calculations, planning tomorrow's foraging expeditions. The forest, the hedgerows, the common lands, they're your supplementary larder, offering their gifts to those who know how to look. But as you prepare for sleep, you're acutely aware that winter is coming, and nature's charity has its limits. You reach for the leather flask hanging from a peg on the wall, feeling the familiar weight of ale slosh inside. The liquid that pours into your wooden cup is cloudy, yeasty, and barely stronger than water. But that's precisely the point. This is small ale, your daily drink, your liquid bread, and most importantly, your alternative to the death trap that is your village well. The irony isn't lost on you as you take a long pull of the weak brew. Water, free, clear, abundant water, could kill you faster than a week without food. You've seen what happens to those who drink from the stream where everyone washes, where animals wade, where waste inevitably finds its way. The flux, the fever, the agonizing death that follows. So instead, you drink ale for breakfast, ale for lunch, ale for dinner, and give watered-down ale to your children as soon as they're weaned. Your wife is already preparing tomorrow's batch, and you watch her work with the practiced efficiency of someone who's been brewing since childhood. First, she soaks the barley, the same barley that could have been food, but survival demands sacrifice. The grain sits in water until it sprouts, then gets dried and crushed. Malting, she calls it, though she learned the process from her mother without ever needing fancy terms. The smell of fermentation permeates your home, a permanent fixture like smoke and sweat. It's not unpleasant exactly, yeasty, slightly sweet, with an undertone of something earthy. Your brewing equipment is pathetic by any standard. A large pot, some wooden buckets, and a piece of linen for straining. No hops for you. Those are for people who can afford flavour. Your ale is bittered with whatever herbs grow wild. Ground ivy, bog myrtle, or yarrow when you can find it. Small ale is a misleading name, really. There's nothing small about its importance in your life, with an alcohol content hovering around 1 to 2%. It won't get you drunk no matter how much you consume, which is good because you drink it constantly. The fermentation process, crude as it is, kills most of the nasties that would otherwise turn your intestines into a battlefield. Medieval historians love to debate exactly how much ale peasants consumed daily, with estimates ranging from 1 to 2 gallons. Sitting here with your third cup since sunset, you'd say those estimates are probably conservative. The children complain about the taste sometimes, especially your youngest, who makes elaborate faces with every sip. You've caught him eyeing the well bucket longingly on hot days, and you've had to explain, again, about bad water and dead neighbours. He doesn't fully understand why something so clear and cool could be dangerous while this murky, bitter liquid keeps him healthy. Medieval germ theory consists mainly of bad air and God's will. But you know from experience that ale drinkers live longer than water drinkers. Your neighbour stumbles by, considerably more intoxicated than your small ale could ever achieve. He's been to the alehouse, spending scarce coins on proper strong ale. You can smell it on him. Hoppy, potent, the kind of brew that makes you forget your troubles until tomorrow's headache reminds you forcefully. The village alewife, a formidable widow who guards her recipes like gold, produces ale that can floor a grown man with shocking efficiency, but at a penny per gallon. It's a luxury you can afford maybe twice a year. Harvest festival and Christmas if you're lucky. The sexual politics of brewing fascinate the educated folks who occasionally pass through. They note with interest that brewing is women's work, one of the few trades where a woman can earn independent income. Your wife nods along politely when they expound on this, then returns to the endless cycle of malting, mashing, and fermenting that keeps your family hydrated and alive. Theory is nice, but practice means never letting the ale supply run dry. Sometimes merchants pass through with wine, that mysterious beverage of the wealthy. You tasted it once at your wedding. The Lord gifted a small cask to the village, probably gone sour, but you all pretended it was ambrosia. The taste was sharp, acidic, nothing like the sweet nectar priests describe. You'll stick with your ale, thank you very much. At least you understand what goes into it. The brewing failures haunt your memory. The batch that went sour, forcing you to drink water for 3 terrifying days until everyone developed stomach cramps. The time mice got into the malting barley, ruining a week's worth of grain. The horrible experimental brew your wife made with mouldy rye that gave everyone visions, though historians still argue whether medieval people knew about ergot poisoning or just thought it was divine punishment. Your cup empties, and you debate a refill. The ale is weak, but too much liquid before bed means stumbling outside to the cesspit in the freezing darkness. Medieval life is full of these delicate calculations. You decide on half a cup more, just enough to wash down the last crusts of bread you've been saving. As you sip, you notice your eldest daughter watching your wife's brewing process intently. Good. She'll need these skills when she marries. The ability to produce drinkable ale is the difference between a healthy family and one decimated by waterborne disease. You raise your cup in a silent toast to the yeast, those invisible allies in humanity's war against death by dysentery. The smell hits you before your wife even unwraps the precious bundle, a mix of salt, age, and something distinctly funky that makes your mouth water and your nose wrinkle simultaneously. She's retrieved the household's most valuable food items from their hiding place, a hard chunk of cheese wrapped in dirty cloth, and a strip of salted pork that's seen better days, possibly better years. You watch her cut the tiniest possible sliver of cheese with the concentration of someone performing surgery. This isn't the fresh, creamy cheese the Lord's kitchen produces daily. This is peasant cheese, aged until it could double as a weapon, salty enough to preserve it through seasons, and hard enough to survive being buried in your floor to hide it from tax collectors. The piece she hands you is barely the size of your thumbnail, but you make it last, letting it slowly dissolve on your tongue like a dairy communion wafer. The cheese-making happened last spring when your goat was actually producing decent milk. Your wife had carefully saved enough milk over several days, warming it by the fire and adding a precious bit of rennet traded from a neighbor. The curds were pressed under stones, salted with more salt than you could really afford, and aged in the coolest corner of your hut. What started as a soft, white disc has transformed into this rock-hard, yellow-brown treasure that tastes like concentrated survival. Now comes the main event, the salt pork. Your wife shaves off paper-thin slices, so translucent you could almost see through them if you held them to the firelight. This meat came from last year's pig, not your pig. You can't afford to keep pigs, but the runt the Lord's swineherd secretly sold to village families for a share of the meat. The memory of slaughter day still lingers, the squealing, the blood, the frantic work of cutting, salting, and preserving before anything could spoil. Salt is the magic ingredient, the difference between meat and a feast of maggots. You remember the salt merchant who passed through last summer, his precious white crystals guarded better than the Lord's gold. A pound of salt cost more than you earned in a week, but without it, preservation was impossible. So you saved, traded, and maybe appropriated a bit from the Lord's kitchen. The less said about that, the better. Until you had enough to pack that pork in a thick salt crust. The children stare at the meat with the intensity of wolves, but they know better than to ask for more. This pork has to last, carefully rationed. It might stretch another month. Your wife adds the thin slices to the pottage pot, where they'll dissolve and spread their porky essence through tomorrow's meal. One slice can flavor a whole pot, transforming mundane gruel into something almost festive. Preservation is a war against time and decay, and you're constantly losing ground. That cheese will eventually become too hard even for your strong peasant teeth. The pork, despite its salt armor, shows suspicious dark spots that you carefully cut around. Your wife has other tricks. Eggs packed in ash, butter sealed in salt-glazed crocks, and vegetables fermented in brine. But everything has its limits, and rot is patient. The fermented cabbage, sauerkraut, though you don't call it that, bubbles away in its clay pot, producing a sour smell that permeates everything. Your wife learned this preservation method from a traveling merchant who claimed it prevented sailors from getting sick on long voyages. You don't know about that, but fermented cabbage lasts months and adds a sour punch to pottage that almost counts as flavor. Historians love to debate medieval food preservation techniques, discussing salt-to-meat ratios and smoking methods with academic precision. They've clearly never experienced the bowel-clenching terror of biting into meat that's gone off, or the careful calculus of deciding whether that cheese is still edible or has crossed into potentially lethal territory. Your preservation methods are crude but effective. Salt everything. Dry what you can. Ferment what won't dry, and pray to every saint you can name that it doesn't kill you. Your neighbor once tried to preserve fish without enough salt, trying to stretch his supplies. The resulting food poisoning killed his youngest child and left the rest of the family weakened for months. Since then, everyone errs on the side of oversalting, even if it means food that could strip the lining from your mouth. Better to need gallons of ale to wash down salty meat than to die from bad preservation. The truly wealthy have ice houses and armies of servants to ensure fresh food. They have spices from distant lands that not only preserve but add exotic flavors. Meanwhile, you're grateful for salt, smoke, and the cold corner of your hut where things rot slightly slower. Your wife has developed an almost supernatural ability to detect spoilage, sniffing out danger before it becomes visible. It's a skill passed from mother to daughter, along with the knowledge of which molds are harmless, the white fuzz on hard cheese, and which mean death, anything green on meat. As the evening progresses, the precious preserved foods are carefully rewrapped and returned to their hiding spots. That cheese needs to last another fortnight. The pork might stretch to Christmas if you're careful. These aren't just foods. They're insurance against starvation, deployed strategically when pottage and bread alone won't suffice. The moon has risen full and bright, casting silver shadows through the trees as you creep toward the forest edge. Your heart pounds against your ribs, not from exertion, but from the knowledge that what you're about to do could cost you a hand, an eye, or your life. The Lord's forest beckons with its bounty of mushrooms, nuts, and herbs, but it's also a trap waiting to spring on desperate peasants like you. You've left the children sleeping and told your wife you're checking on the goat. She didn't question it. She knows exactly where you're going and why. The handful of wild onions and acorns you gathered from the common lands won't stretch the pottage much longer. The forest, with its carpets of mushrooms and hidden clusters of hazelnuts, represents the difference between a full belly and another night of hunger cramps. The penalties for poaching forest resources are severe enough to make your blood run cold. Just last month, they pilloried Robert the Thatcher for gathering fallen branches, dead wood that would have rotted anyway. The week before that, young Tom Miller lost his left hand for snaring a rabbit. The Lord's foresters patrol regularly, and they're paid bonuses for catching poachers. Yet here you are, slinking through the shadows like the criminal the law says you are. Your feet know these paths from countless nighttime expeditions. That's where the chanterelles grow after rain, their golden trumpets barely visible in the moonlight. Over there, beneath the ancient oak, you found puffballs the size of your head. You work quickly, silently, filling your rough sack with nature's contraband. Every snapping twig makes you freeze. Every owl hoot sends your heart racing. The mushrooms are risky business even beyond the legal dangers. You stick to the varieties your grandmother taught you: chanterelles, puffballs, honey mushrooms. The destroying angel mushrooms grow here too. Beautiful white things that would solve your hunger permanently, sometimes. During particularly bad harvests, you hear of entire families found dead, their last meal of foraged mushrooms turned feast of death. Medieval mycology consists mainly of generational knowledge and prayers. You spot a hazel thicket heavy with nuts and can't resist. The Lord claims every nut, every berry, every living thing in his forest. But surely God meant these foods for all his children. Your fingers work quickly, stripping nuts into your sack while your ears strain for the sound of approaching horses. The foresters sometimes patrol on foot, the better to surprise poachers. But their dogs are what you really fear. Those massive hounds can track a man through water and darkness. A rustling in the underbrush makes you drop flat, pressing yourself into the damp leaves. Your heart hammers so loudly you're certain it'll give you away. But it's only a badger, grumbling its way through the undergrowth, probably on its own foraging mission. You allow yourself a shaky breath and continue filling your sack. Risk versus reward, the eternal calculation of the desperate. The nobles justify their forest monopoly with talk of preservation and royal hunting rights. They claim commoners would strip the forest bare if given free access. Sitting in their warm halls with their bellies full of venison, they can afford such high-minded principles. You'd like to see them try to fill their children's stomachs with principles when the pottage runs thin and the bread runs out. Your sack grows heavy with mushrooms, nuts, wild garlic, and herbs. You even find some late blackberries, wizened but still sweet. Each item represents a small victory against starvation and the system that keeps you hungry. But it's time to go. You've pushed your luck far enough. The journey back is always worse, weighed down with illegal goods and the knowledge that capture now means certain punishment. Historians debate whether medieval forest laws were regularly enforced or mostly theoretical threats. They can debate all they want. You've seen the mutilated hands, the branded faces, the men hanging from gibbets at crossroads for the crime of feeding their families. The Lord's justice is swift and brutal when it comes to protecting his property, even property that rots on the forest floor. You're almost to the forest edge when you hear it, the baying of hounds in the distance. Your blood turns to ice water. Without thinking, you dump half your precious gatherings, keeping only what you can explain as coming from common land. The rest you scatter into the underbrush, your heart breaking with each discarded mushroom. Better to lose half than lose your hand. The dogs sound closer now, but they might be tracking deer or following an old scent. You don't wait to find out. Moving as quickly as silence allows, you slip from the forest and take the long way home, approaching your hut from the opposite direction. If questioned, you were checking on a sick neighbor. The mushrooms? Found them on common land, my lord. Just past the boundary marker. Your wife says nothing when you slip inside and empty your depleted sack. She simply begins sorting the foraged goods, setting aside some mushrooms to dry, planning which herbs will flavor tomorrow's pottage. You've risked everything for what amounts to a few days flavoring. But in your world, flavor is its own form of wealth. As you settle onto your straw pallet, still trembling from the close call, you're already planning your next foray. The forest's bounty calls to empty stomachs louder than any law. The wooden trencher sits between you and your eldest son, its shallow depressions stained dark from years of use. This isn't a plate in any modern sense. It's a thick slab of wood, hollowed just enough to hold food, shared between two people, because individual dishes are a luxury beyond imagining. You're teaching him the delicate etiquette of trencher sharing, rules as complex as any noble's table manners, but born from necessity rather than refinement. Your side, my side. You remind him as your wife ladles the evening's pottage into the communal hollow. The invisible line down the middle of the trencher is sacred territory. Cross it, and you're stealing food from your partner's mouth. Your son nods solemnly, understanding that this is no mere mealtime nicety, but a survival skill he'll need when he shares a trencher with his future wife. The single wooden spoon passes between family members in strict rotation. First you, as the primary laborer, then your wife, then children by age. Everyone gets 3 scoops before passing it on. Your youngest hasn't mastered the rhythm yet, taking too long with each bite while others wait. The older children exchange meaningful glances. Dawdling means less food for everyone once the pot empties. Table manners in your world revolve around one principle: maximum efficiency with minimum conflict. You eat with your right hand only. The left is for less savory tasks, and everyone knows it. Fingers serve as utensils for anything solid enough to grab. Your knife, the one metal implement you own, is for cutting bread and meat on those rare occasions when you have any. Forks are mythical objects that merchants describe from far-off lands, seemingly designed for people with nothing better to do than complicate eating. Your wife tears the small loaf of bread into precisely equal portions, a skill that would impress mathematicians if any bothered visiting peasant huts. Each piece serves double duty: food and utensil. You use it to sop up pottage, push food onto your spoon, and finally eat the gravy-soaked bread itself. Nothing is wasted. The trencher itself will be given to the pig, if you had a pig, or gnawed clean by the dog before being scrubbed for tomorrow. The communal nature of eating extends beyond your immediate family. When your brother's family visits, trenchers are shared between households, adults paired with adults, children with children. There's an unspoken hierarchy. The best trencher, least cracked and newest, goes to the eldest. The worst, splitting along old grain lines, goes to the youngest children who haven't learned to complain yet. Medieval dining etiquette among peasants would horrify the nobility, but it serves its purpose. No reaching across others. Wait for the food to come to you. No talking with your mouth full. Not from politeness, but because wasting time talking means someone else gets another scoop. No playing with food. That's next week's meal you're disrespecting. Every rule has survival at its heart. Your daughter has developed the useful skill of eating hot pottage without flinching. While others blow and wait, she's already swallowing her portion, guaranteeing herself a shot at seconds if any exist. It's not greed, it's adaptation. The family that eats fastest when food is plenty survives longest when food is scarce. The ale jug makes its own rounds, each person taking a measured swig. Your wife monitors consumption with an eagle eye, too much, and someone goes without tomorrow. The children have learned to take small sips, making a show of satisfaction to avoid suspicion that they're shorting themselves. It's theatre, really. Everyone performing contentment while calculating how to maximize their intake. Bones, when you have them, present their own protocol. They're passed hand to hand, each person gnawing off whatever meat clings to them, sucking out marrow if any remains. By the time a bone completes the circuit, it's polished clean as any archaeological specimen. The dog waits patiently for the final verdict. Sometimes even bones get boiled again for soup stock before becoming her prize. Historians love discussing the civilizing process of table manners, how eating became increasingly refined over centuries. They clearly haven't watched a family of 8 share 2 trenchers and 3 spoons while racing against hunger. Your manners are perfectly civilized for your context. They prevent fights, ensure fair distribution, and maintain just enough order to make communal eating possible rather than a daily battlefield. The scraping of wood on wood signals the meal's end. Your son has learned well, keeping to his side of the trencher, matching your pace spoon for spoon. The pottage pot is empty, the bread consumed, every surface licked or scraped clean. Your wife collects the spoons, counted carefully, these precious implements, while children eye the pot hopefully for any overlooked morsels. As you settle back, belly not full but no longer actively protesting, you watch your family perform the evening clean-up ritual, trenchers stacked for tomorrow, spoon secured, pot scraped and ready for its next incarnation. The dance of communal eating is complete for another day. Everyone fed, if not satisfied. The delicate balance of shared resources maintained through wooden boundaries and unspoken rules. Friday again. Your stomach growls in protest as you push away the small portion of salted pork your wife tried to slip into your bowl. The church says no meat on Fridays, and while your empty belly might disagree, your immortal soul can't afford to argue with God's representatives on earth. The irony that you barely eat meat anyway seems lost on the priests who designed these fasting rules from their well-stocked kitchens. The religious calendar governs your gut as surely as the agricultural one. Fridays mean no meat. Ember days, 4 sets of 3-day fasts scattered throughout the year, mean even tighter belts. Lent stretches before you like 40 days in purgatory, where even eggs and dairy join meat on the forbidden list. You've calculated it once, between Fridays, Ember days, Lent, and various saints' feast day fasts. You're religiously obligated to avoid meat for nearly half the year. Good thing you can barely afford it anyway. Your wife performs culinary miracles with fish, when you can get it. The travelling fishmonger comes through perhaps once a month, his cart reeking of salted herring and dried cod that's seen better decades. Fresh fish is a fantasy unless you live near water and risk poaching from the Lord's streams. So you make do with herring so salty it burns your mouth, or stockfish beaten with a mallet until it's soft enough to chew, then soaked until it resembles something vaguely edible. The children don't understand why God cares what goes in their stomachs. Your youngest asked once why Jesus, who multiplied loaves and fishes for the hungry, now demands his followers go hungry in his name. You cuffed him gently for the blasphemy while secretly wondering the same thing. The priest speaks of spiritual purification through physical denial, but it's easy to preach denial when your own purification involves dining on fresh pike while peasants gnaw salted herring. Today's meal is pottage, surprise, surprise, but meatless even by your standards. No bacon fat for flavour, no marrow bones for richness. Your wife compensates with wild garlic and herbs, creating an aromatic brew that almost masks the absence of anything substantial. She saved the water from boiling vegetables, claiming it has virtues that plain water lacks. Anything to fill the belly within God's complex dietary rules. The wealthy have their workarounds. Of course, beaver tails count as fish because beavers swim. Barnacle geese are acceptable because medieval scholars believe they grow from barnacles rather than hatching from eggs. Unborn rabbits, pulled from their mothers' wombs, technically haven't lived on land yet, so they're basically fish. The mental gymnastics would be amusing if your own stomach wasn't cramping from hunger. Your neighbour invited you to share a fish last week, a water hen he'd trapped. Birds that swim are fish, he argued. And who were you to debate theology with a full mouth? But guilt gnawed worse than hunger, and you spent the next morning in confession, doing penance on already sore knees. The priest assigned you 3 paternosters and an Ave Maria, a light sentence that suggested even he understood the flexibility required when divine law meets human hunger. Advent approaches with its own fasting requirements, followed immediately by Christmas feasting. If you can afford anything worth feasting on, then more fasting to atone for whatever meager celebration you managed. The cycle continues perpetually. Fast, feast, repent, repeat. Your body never quite adjusts, always either preparing for denial or recovering from it. The monastery bells calling evening prayers remind you that monks face even stricter rules. No meat ever, limited meals, specific eating times. Yet somehow the brothers you see at market look remarkably well fed. Rumor has it their definition of vegetables includes some creative interpretations, and their fish ponds are suspiciously well stocked with creatures that might generously be called aquatic. Your wife mentions she's found duck eggs hidden in the reeds by the pond. Eggs occupy a theological grey area, not quite meat, but animal products nonetheless. Some priests forbid them during Lent. Others allow them. Your village priest, bless him, tends toward leniency, understanding that forbidding eggs might mean the difference between survival and starvation for families already stretched thin. Medieval fasting rules create their own economy. Fish prices triple during Lent, making fishmongers rich and peasants poorer. Almonds, ground into milk as a dairy substitute, become worth their weight in silver. You've tried making almond milk from foraged nuts, but the effort hardly seems worth the thin, grainy liquid it produces. Better to save those nuts for eating whole when hunger strikes. As you finish your meatless meal, you catch your son eyeing the small piece of bacon hanging in the rafters. Tomorrow is Saturday. Meat is allowed again. Not that you'll eat it. That bacon needs to last another week at least. But knowing you could eat it, that God permits it, somehow makes the perpetual hunger easier to bear. The feast days, when they come, feel like miracles. Easter, Christmas, Saints' days when the Lord provides a village feast. These bright spots punctuate the grinding routine of fasting and denial. But tonight, like most nights, you'll sleep with a belly full of herbs and water, dreaming of the heavenly banquet priest's promise awaits the faithful. Hopefully, God's eternal feast includes seconds. The small patch of earth behind your hut represents hope incarnate, your kitchen garden, where miracles occasionally spring from mud and manure. By moonlight, you creep outside with a bucket of precious water, knowing that tending vegetables in darkness means less chance of the Lord's steward noticing how well your cabbages are growing. Too much success in gardening leads to increased taxes, and you've learned to keep your best produce hidden like green gold. Your wife has divided the garden with the strategic mind of a military commander. Cabbages dominate one section, their broad leaves spreading like shields against starvation. Leeks stand in soldierly rows. Onions cluster in pungent battalions, and turnips burrow underground like edible treasures waiting to be discovered. Every plant has been chosen for maximum survival, both the plants and yours. The herbs grow closest to the house where you can protect them from both animals and neighbors with sticky fingers. Parsley, sage, thyme. Not because you're culinary artists, but because these hardy plants survive neglect and transform pottage from gruel to something almost palatable. Your wife guards the small patch of garlic like a dragon hoards gold. Those pungent bulbs don't just flavor food, they're medicine, currency, and according to village wisdom, protection against everything from plague to evil spirits. You've learned the hard way which vegetables earn their keep. Beans climb makeshift poles, fixing nitrogen in the soil while producing protein-rich pods. Peas follow similar logic. Root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots, store well and grow in soil too poor for grain. Cabbages prove their worth by surviving frost, actually improving in flavor after the first freeze. Everything in your garden must pull double or triple duty: food, medicine, and trade goods. The Lord theoretically owns everything you grow, but even his greediest stewards can't count every cabbage leaf. You've developed subtle arts of horticultural deception. The best cabbages grow in the center, hidden by larger, coarser outer plants. Turnips get harvested at night, leaving the greens to suggest smaller roots below. Your wife processes herbs immediately, drying and hiding them before any tax collector realizes their value. Water presents its own challenges. The well serves the entire village, and taking more than your allotted share brings swift retribution. So you've positioned rain barrels strategically, channeling every drop from your thatch roof into storage. During dry spells, you carry water from the stream in the pre-dawn darkness, hoping the effort won't kill the vegetables it's meant to save. The feudal system apparently extends even to rainwater. Technically, that belongs to the Lord too. Your daughter shows promise as an herbalist, identifying plants by smell and knowing their uses. She can tell you which herbs bring down fever, which ease childbirth, which flavor food versus which flavor it permanently if you confuse them. This knowledge passes woman to woman, mother to daughter, a green thread of survival woven through generations. The church frowns on herb women, whispering about witchcraft, but tolerates them because even priests need remedies for their aching bellies. The constant battle against pests requires creativity bordering on desperation. Slugs get drowned in shallow dishes of ale, a waste that pains you but saves the cabbages. Rabbits face increasingly elaborate defenses, thorn barriers, human hair scattered as deterrent. The dog stationed nearby when she's not too exhausted to care. Birds present special challenges, smart enough to wait until vegetables reach perfect ripeness before stripping plants bare. Historians love to romanticize medieval gardens as quaint plots of herbs and flowers. They've clearly never spent a summer night battling slugs for possession of the last cabbage, or watched rabbits mock your fences while destroying a month's work in minutes. Your garden isn't quaint. It's a battlefield where you fight daily for every leaf, every root, every precious herb that stands between your family and nutritional disaster. The seasons dictate your garden's rhythm more tyrannically than any lord. Spring means anxious planting, praying last frost has truly passed. Summer brings weeding, watering, and constant vigilance against pests. Autumn means frantic harvesting, processing, and storage. Winter finds you planning next year's campaign while rationing this year's survivors. The cycle never ends, each season bringing its own demands and disappointments. Your wife has been experimenting with fermentation, turning excess cabbage into something that lasts months and supposedly prevents the bleeding gums that plague villagers every winter. Sauerkraut, she calls it, learned from that traveling merchant. The smell during fermentation could wake the dead, but the resulting sour mush adds variety to winter meals and might keep everyone's teeth from falling out. Medieval gardening wisdom mixes practical knowledge with superstition in equal measure. Plant root vegetables during the waning moon. Harvest herbs before dawn while the dew still clings. Never plant beans on a Friday. Some of it might be nonsense. But when your family's survival depends on a tiny plot of earth, you follow every rule, rational or otherwise. As you finish watering by moonlight, you allow yourself a moment's pride. Your cabbages are coming along nicely. The turnips show promise, and the herbs might actually flavor tomorrow's pottage into something memorable. It's not much, a quarter acre of vegetables, but it represents independence of sorts. Every turnip you grow is one less you need to beg, buy, or steal. In your world, that counts as victory. The thought of meat, real, fresh meat, haunts your dreams like a succulent ghost. You lie on your straw pallet, stomach only partially satisfied by the evening's vegetable pottage, and fantasize about rabbit stew. The fantasy is so vivid you can almost taste it. Tender meat falling off tiny bones, rich broth thick with fat, wild onions and herbs transforming simple protein into a feast fit for, well, fit for someone who isn't you. The reality of your protein situation is considerably less appetizing. Your family sees meat perhaps once a month, usually in portions so small they barely qualify as a taste. The Lord's forest teems with deer, boar, rabbits, and birds, but they might as well live on the moon for all the good they do you. The penalty for poaching a deer is death. For a boar, you'll lose a hand. Even rabbits, those prolific pests that destroy gardens across the Shire, belong to his lordship. But hunger has a way of making criminals of honest men. Hidden in the hedge behind your hut, carefully concealed beneath dead branches and leaves, lie your snares, simple devices made from horsehair and thin rope, positioned along rabbit runs you've mapped through careful observation. You check them in the grey pre-dawn, when mist provides cover and the Lord's foresters are still warming their bones by their fires. Most mornings bring disappointment, empty snares, sometimes stolen by foxes or other peasants with similar ideas. But occasionally, perhaps once or twice a month if you're lucky, you'll find a rabbit struggling in the noose. The sight fills you with equal parts elation and terror. Elation at the promise of meat, terror at the consequences if caught. You dispatch the creature quickly, quietly, and stuff it beneath your tunic for the paranoid journey home. Your wife has become an expert at making a single rabbit feed a family of 6. Nothing goes to waste. Absolutely nothing. The meat gets jointed and added to the perpetual pottage, where it'll flavor meals for days. Bones are cracked for marrow, then boiled repeatedly until they've given up every molecule of nutrition. The organs, liver, kidneys, heart, are delicacies that disappear into eager mouths before they can even cool. The hide gets scraped, salted, and eventually traded to the tanner for a few precious pennies or a bit of leather for shoe repairs. Even the head serves a purpose. Your wife boils it until the meat falls off, then cracks the skull for the brains, a fatty richness that your youngest daughter claims makes her smarter, though you suspect that's wishful thinking. The eyes go to whoever's brave enough, usually your eldest son proving his approaching manhood. Every part finds a purpose, transforming one small rabbit into a week's worth of enhanced meals. Legal hunting exists in theory. The Lord occasionally declares a common hunt, usually when wolves threaten his sheep or wild boars destroy his crops. Peasants are conscripted as beaters, driving game toward noble hunters who claim all the kills. Your reward for a day of dangerous, exhausting work. The privilege of purchasing organ meat at slightly reduced prices. You once spent a full day helping hunt a massive boar, only to watch it carved up for the castle while you went home with empty hands and thorn-torn clothes. Fishing presents similar frustrations. The river running through the valley teems with pike, perch, and eels. But the Lord owns the water as surely as he owns the land. The mill pond, where fish congregate in tempting abundance, is especially well guarded. Young Tom from the next village lost an eye to a forester's arrow when caught with a fishing line. The message was clear: starve legally rather than eat illegally. So you make do with what protein you can legally obtain. Birds' eggs when you find them, though taking them from the wrong trees counts as poaching. Field mice when the cat catches extra. Snails after rain, which your wife insists are nutritious despite the children's disgusted faces. During harvest, when extra hands are needed, the Lord might slaughter an old cow and share the meat among workers. Those days feel like Christmas come early. Even if your portion is mostly gristle and bone, the pig situation torments you particularly. Other villages keep communal pigs, fed on scraps and acorns, slaughtered in autumn with shares distributed according to contribution. But your Lord forbids it, claiming all forest acorns for his own swine. You've petitioned repeatedly, pointing out the waste of perfectly good pig food. But petitions from peasants have a way of disappearing before reaching anyone with power to act. Historians debate whether medieval peasants suffered from protein deficiency or found adequate nutrition through creative means. Those debates feel academic when you're pulling snares empty for the 10th consecutive morning, or watching your children grow slowly, their limbs thin despite full bellies of grain. Protein isn't just about survival, it's about thriving, about children who grow tall and strong rather than stunted and weak. Tonight, though, fortune smiles. Your eldest son slips in after dark with something bundled in his tunic, a rabbit, young and fat, caught in the snare you'd almost given up on. Your wife immediately sets to work, her movements efficient and silent. By dawn, evidence will be destroyed, the meat absorbed into pottage, the bones buried deep. For the next week, your family will eat a little better, stand a little taller, work a little harder. As you drift toward sleep, belly warm with rabbit-enhanced pottage, you offer a prayer of thanks for successful poaching and a plea for forgiveness for the theft. Surely God understands that his creatures were meant to feed his children, regardless of what earthly lords claim. Tomorrow, you'll reset the snares and hope again, playing the dangerous game between starvation and punishment, between empty bellies and empty nooses. The precious egg sits in your palm like a warm promise, its brown shell speckled and perfect. Your wife collected it this morning from beneath the scrawny hen that somehow survives on kitchen scraps and determination. 1 egg for a family of 6. The mathematics of scarcity transform this simple egg into an object of complex negotiation and careful planning. Your hen, and you only have the one, shared custody with your brother's family on alternate weeks, is less a livestock animal and more a feathered miracle worker. She transforms bugs, worms, and food waste into protein packages that could mean the difference between health and malnutrition. When she's laying well, perhaps 3 or 4 eggs per week, your family walks a little taller. When she stops, as she does every winter and during molts, a small panic sets in. The children watch as your wife deliberates over the egg's fate. Will it go into the pottage, stretching its golden richness across multiple meals? Will she save it for Sunday, soft-boiled and divided 6 ways, each person getting a precious taste? Or, and this is the fantasy that makes mouths water, will she trade it to the baker's wife for a small loaf of better bread than you can afford? Milk presents its own complications. Your goat, a temperamental beast named Bertha, though naming livestock is dangerous when you might need to eat them, produces perhaps a cup or 2 daily when she's feeling generous. She's currently dry, pregnant with kids that might survive to provide future milk, or might become emergency rations if winter grows too harsh. The elaborate dance of breeding, feeding, and milking small livestock would exhaust farmers with actual resources. For you, it's just another layer of survival complexity. When Bertha is producing, every drop counts. Fresh milk goes to the youngest children first. Their growing bodies need it most. What remains gets carefully allocated, some for the pottage, transforming it into something almost creamy, some set aside to sour for cheese making, a precious spoonful for your wife who's looking thin after the hard harvest. You and your eldest son make do with whey, the thin liquid left after cheese making, which tastes like disappointment, but supposedly has virtues. Your neighbor keeps 2 goats and trades milk for labor. Last week, you spent a full day repairing his roof in exchange for a week's worth of milk. The economics made sense. His goats produce more than his family can use before it spoils, while your labor keeps his home dry. These informal exchanges, beneath the Lord's notice and tax collector's interest, form the real economy of village survival. The dream of owning a cow haunts you like the ghost of prosperity. Cows give milk by the bucket, not the cup. Their cream rises thick and yellow, transforming into butter that keeps for weeks. But cows need pasture you don't have, hay you can't afford, and represent wealth that would immediately attract tax increases. Better to dream smaller, perhaps another hen, or arrangement to share ownership of a sheep. Cheese-making in your hovels bears no resemblance to the great wheels aging in monastery cellars. Your wife's cheese is a desperate attempt to preserve milk before it spoils, using wild thistle for rennet because proper rennet costs money. The results are unpredictable. Sometimes a firm cheese that ages into something edible. Sometimes a crumbly mess that goes into pottage regardless. Failure isn't an option when protein is this scarce. The children have learned to find calcium where they can. They gnaw on soft bones until they splinter, suck marrow like candy, and your wife grinds eggshells into powder to add to pottage. Whether this helps their growth is debatable, but maternal desperation drives innovation. You've seen too many children with bent legs and soft bones to ignore any possibility of prevention. Medieval nutritionists, if such existed, would be appalled at your family's dairy situation. The recommended daily intake of calcium and protein remains a fantasy when you're grateful for any intake at all. Your youngest daughter's teeth are already showing signs of weakness, and your son's growth has slowed despite his age suggesting he should be shooting up like wheat. The egg economy extends beyond your single hen. During spring, when wild birds nest, the children become expert nest raiders. Blackbird eggs, pigeon eggs, even the tiny speckled eggs of sparrows, all fair game if you can reach them before the birds hatch or predators strike. The church frowns on taking eggs during certain holy seasons, but hunger recognizes no calendar but its own. Your wife has developed a peculiar genius for making eggs last. She's learned to coat them in tallow, sealing the shells so they keep for weeks. During autumn, when the hen lays most reliably, she'll trade labor for extra eggs, then preserve them for winter's scarcity. The sight of a dozen preserved eggs hidden in the coolest corner of your hut feels like wealth beyond measure. Today's egg gets the pottage treatment. Your wife cracks it carefully into the simmering pot, where it cooks into golden ribbons that flavor the entire meal. The children watch with the intensity of hawks as she stirs, ensuring even distribution. Everyone will taste egg tonight, even if it's just a hint of richness in their wooden bowls. As evening deepens, you check on Bertha the goat, heavily pregnant and grumpy. If she delivers healthy kids, if at least one is female, if it survives to milking age, so many ifs. Your family's nutrition might improve marginally. Until then, you're grateful for your temperamental hen, your dry goat, and the occasional wild egg that supplements your diet. In the grand scheme of medieval livestock, you're neither rich nor destitute, just another family making do with creatures as stubborn and survival-oriented as their owners. The first real snow of winter has arrived, transforming your world into a beautiful, deadly wasteland of white. You stare at the barren landscape through the gap in your shutters, calculating how many days, maybe weeks, your family can survive on what's stored in the hut. Winter doesn't just bring cold, It brings the annual test of whether your summer's labors and autumn's frantic preservation will see you through to spring. Your wife has already begun the grim ritual of rationing. The sack of dried peas gets measured out with religious precision. A handful per day for the pot, no more, no matter how the children's eyes plead. The turnips in the root cellar, layered in sand and straw, must last until March. She counts them like a miser counts coins, knowing that eating too well in December means starvation in February. The preserved foods from autumn have already begun their slow disappearance. Those apple rings you dried so carefully, half gone by Christmas. The mushrooms you risked the forest laws to gather, reduced to a precious few handfuls that must flavor meals for 2 more months. Even the sauerkraut, that fermented cabbage your wife swears keeps the scurvy away, depletes faster than winter retreats. Ice forms inside your hut on the coldest nights, creeping up the walls like frozen fingers. The fire must be kept small. Firewood is another resource requiring careful rationing. You burn dried cow dung when you can get it, peat when you can't, and spend most evenings huddled together for warmth rather than wasting precious fuel. The children sleep in a pile like puppies. Their combined body heat the best defense against winter's bite. Your daily meal has simplified to its most basic form. Morning brings hot water flavored with a few dried herbs, tea. You call it generously. Midday might see a piece of hard bread soaked in the same herb water. Evening's pottage is thinner now, stretched with water and thickened with ground acorns when the barley runs low. The pot still bubbles constantly, but its contents grow ever more creative as traditional ingredients disappear. The hen stopped laying weeks ago, her energy focused on survival rather than egg production. Bertha the goat huddles in her corner, heavily pregnant and eating precious hay. You eye her sometimes, wondering if fresh meat now might be worth more than potential milk later. But your wife guards her fiercely. Those unborn kids represent spring hope, future milk, future survival. Besides, eating your only livestock in early winter marks you as either desperate or foolish. Neighbors share winter's misery in communal suffering. Old Martha next door ran out of flour last week, so your wife shared a handful, not charity, but investment. When your own supplies run low, Martha will remember these exchanges, tracked in mental ledgers rather than writing. Keep the village alive when individual households might fail. Even the stingiest villager knows that winter generosity earns spring reciprocation. The feast of Christmas provides brief respite. The Lord, in customary display of largesse, provides a meal for his peasants. You shuffle through snow to the manor hall, where actual meat, old mutton, but still meat, appears on trenchers. White bread, ale that isn't watered to homeopathic levels, even dried fruits that explode with sweetness on your tongue. For one day, you eat like humans rather than livestock. Then it's back to turnips and determination. Your eldest son has developed a concerning cough that echoes through the night. Winter illness terrifies more than hunger. At least you can combat hunger with careful planning. Disease, the constant companion of cold and malnutrition, strikes randomly and kills efficiently. Your wife brews pine needle tea, doses him with precious garlic, and prays to every saint associated with healing. The herbs might help. The prayers certainly can't hurt. And sometimes children recover despite everything. Historians debate medieval winter mortality rates, throwing around statistics that mean nothing when it's your child coughing, your stomach cramping from hunger, your firewood dwindling faster than days until spring. They discuss seasonal mortality patterns and demographic impacts of subsistence crises. You just know that making it to March feels like climbing a mountain made of ice and hunger. The preserved meats from autumn, that carefully salted pork, the rock-hard cheese, get deployed strategically now. A sliver of pork fat makes the difference between pottage that satisfies and gruel that merely fills space. The cheese, gnawed slowly, provides essential fat and the illusion of plenty. Your wife has become a master of psychological cuisine, making less seem like more through careful presentation and timing. February looms as the cruelest month. By then, the root vegetables will be soft, sprouting eyes and losing nutrition. The preserved foods will be memories. Even the wealthy feel February's bite, though they feel it with wine and roasted meats rather than water and wishes. For your family, February means the knife's edge between survival and surrender, when spring seems impossibly distant and last year's harvest impossibly long ago. But tonight, you're still in early winter. The supplies haven't run desperately low yet. The family still has energy for evening conversations rather than the listless silence of late winter. Your wife adds a precious dried apple to the pottage, its sweetness transforming the meal into something almost festive. Outside, snow continues to fall, beautiful and deadly, blanketing the world in cold that will test every preparation you've made. Tomorrow, you'll check the snares, hoping winter-hungry rabbits have grown careless. You'll measure out another day's rations, tend the smoking fire, and count days until spring like a prisoner counts days until freedom. But tonight, with your family gathered close and bellies temporarily quiet, winter seems survivable. You've done this before. You'll do it again, probably. The small loaf of bread sits on your rough table, and you watch as your wife performs the evening ritual. She makes the sign of the cross over it, murmuring words that blend Christian prayer with something older, something that would make the priest frown if he heard it clearly. This is kitchen magic, the domestic sorcery that has kept families fed since time before memory, where practical knowledge and supernatural hope intertwine like the herbs hanging from your rafters. Your grandmother knew 100 small spells for food protection and procurement. Don't let a stranger's shadow fall across rising bread dough. It will fall flat and refuse to nourish. Always stir pottage sunwise, never widdershins, or it will spoil before morning. Keep an iron nail in the flour sack to ward off weevils and worse things. Your wife inherited this wisdom along with recipes, understanding that in a world where one bad harvest means death, you need all the help you can get, natural and otherwise. The children have learned their own food superstitions through observation and stern correction. Your youngest reached for bread with her left hand last week and got her knuckles rapped. Right hand for food, left for other business. Your wife reminded her, though whether this rule stems from hygiene or ancient taboo, nobody remembers. The important thing is following it, just as your parents did, just as their parents did, back into the misty past where survival rules became sacred law. Salt holds particular power in your household mythology. Spilling it brings misfortune, not just because it's expensive, but because salt is life, preservation, protection against corruption, both physical and spiritual. When your wife salts meat for preservation, she whispers words your mother taught her, words that might be prayer or might be older than the church itself. The meat seems to last longer when she does this, though whether from faith or proper technique, who can say? Your neighbor swears by burying a piece of bread under the threshold when food runs low, claiming it calls abundance to the household. You've tried it during desperate times. though your wife insists the bread would better serve in bellies than in dirt. Still, when February's hunger gnaws deepest, even skeptics find themselves muttering half-remembered charms over empty pots and barren gardens. The village wise woman, not a witch, never call her that where church ears might hear, knows things about food that transcend mere cooking. She can look at your stores and tell you they'll last till spring, or warn that rationing must tighten. She knows which phase of the moon promises the best preservation, when to harvest herbs for maximum potency, and why you should never count your remaining turnips aloud, lest you invite envy from the unseen world. Bread holds special significance in your folk beliefs. A loaf that splits while baking foretells a split in the family. Bread that molds too quickly means someone has wished ill upon your household. But bread baked on Good Friday has healing powers, lasting months without spoiling, capable of curing ailments when soaked in water and consumed. Your wife keeps a small piece from last Easter, wrapped carefully in clean cloth, a medicine more trusted than any apothecary's potion. The children know the rhymes that accompany food preparation, nonsense verses that might be corrupted Latin, or might predate Rome itself. Mill and mill, grind and ground, keep the evil underground. They chant when grinding precious grain in the handquern you're not supposed to own. The words mean nothing and everything, a spoken talisman against the thousand things that could go wrong between grain and bread. Your wife's morning routine includes checking for signs and portents in the most mundane places. Bubbles in the pottage form patterns that predict weather. Essential knowledge when a sudden freeze could destroy your stored vegetables. The behavior of the fire tells stories. Flames that lean toward the door mean visitors coming, possibly sharing food or needing to be fed. Even the hen's cackling has meaning, announcing eggs or warning of foxes, depending on pitch and duration. Historians documenting medieval folk beliefs often miss how practical magic served psychological needs as much as supernatural ones. When you have so little control over your food security, subject to weather, war, and the whims of lords, small rituals provide the illusion of influence. Crossing yourself before meals isn't just religious devotion. It's an attempt to protect what little you have from forces beyond comprehension. The seasonal ceremonies around food blend Christian and pagan with cheerful disregard for theological purity. Harvest Home includes prayers to God and offerings to the field spirits. Christmas pudding must be stirred by every family member, each making a wish that definitely isn't a prayer to non-Christian powers. Easter eggs get decorated with symbols that predate Christ's resurrection by centuries, ensuring fertility for chickens and children alike. Tonight's protection ritual is simple but heartfelt. Your wife places a small piece of bread at each corner of the table, murmuring words in the old tongue that survives in kitchens despite centuries of sermons. She'll collect these pieces later, feeding them to the birds, not waste, but investment in the covenant between your family and the powers that govern growing things. The children watch solemnly, learning without formal instruction that food is sacred, requiring respect and ritual to ensure its continuation. As you settle for sleep, bellies holding their usual insufficient portions, you find comfort in these small magics are. Maybe the prayers help. Maybe the old words carry power. Maybe it's all meaningless superstition. But in a world where starvation lurks constantly at the door, you'll take whatever help is offered from God, the saints, or whatever older powers still listen to the whispered pleas of hungry peasants. Tomorrow you'll wake, make the proper signs, speak the proper words, and hope they're enough to see another meal on your table. The fire has burned low to glowing embers, casting dancing shadows across the walls of your single-room home. Your stomach, while not satisfied, has at least stopped its angry protests. The thin pottage and hard bread have done their work, not filling you, never that, but pushing hunger back enough to allow sleep. Around you, your family prepares for bed with the weary movements of people who know tomorrow brings only more of the same. Your youngest daughter whimpers softly, her belly still asking for more despite the evening meal. Your wife pulls her close, humming an old lullaby about lands of plenty where rivers flow with milk and honey. It's the same song her mother sang, and her mother's mother, passed down through generations of women who understood that sometimes dreams of fullness must substitute for the real thing. The straw-filled pallets rustle as bodies find their sleeping positions. You'll all huddle together for warmth. Privacy is a luxury as foreign as white bread. Your eldest son's cough punctuates the settling sounds, a reminder that winter hunger brings its companion, illness. But for now, he's warm and his belly holds food. In your world, that counts as a good day. You think about tomorrow's meals, already planned and portioned in your mind. The pottage pot will bubble on, accepting whatever scraps and stores your wife can add. There's enough grain for perhaps another week if you're careful. The salted pork might stretch to Christmas if cut thin enough. The turnips in the cellar promise sustenance if not satisfaction. You've survived on less, though you hope not to test those limits again. The children drop off to sleep one by one, their breathing evening out into the rhythm of exhaustion. They'll dream, perhaps, of the harvest feast, when even peasants ate their fill, or of finding honey in a hollow tree, or of tables that groan under the weight of impossibly white bread. Let them dream. Reality returns soon enough with the dawn. Your wife's hand finds yours in the darkness, rough from work but warm with life. No words are needed. You both know the complex mathematics of survival, the delicate balance between eating today and starving tomorrow. Together, you've kept this family fed, if not full, through another day, in a world that seems designed to starve the poor. That's its own quiet victory. Outside, an owl calls, hunting for its own meal in the frozen darkness. The wind whispers through gaps in the walls, carrying the scent of snow and wood smoke from other hearths where other families perform their own nightly rituals of rationing and hope. The whole village sleeps fitfully, bellies holding just enough, dreams filled with impossible feasts. You shift on the straw, trying to find a position where the hunger pangs fade into background noise. Your body has adapted over the years to this nightly emptiness, though adaptation and acceptance are different things. The priest preaches about fasting bringing you closer to God, but you suspect God has never felt this particular hollow ache that lives permanently below your ribs. Soon, sleep begins to claim you. Your thoughts grow muzzy, drifting between waking worry and approaching dreams. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges: wood to gather, water to haul, work in the Lord's fields even in winter's grip. But it will also bring another day survived, another evening meal, another night gathered with family around whatever the pottage pot provides. The last sound you hear before sleep takes you is the eternal bubbling of that pot, the heart of your home, promising that whatever tomorrow brings, there will at least be something warm to fill your bowl. It's not much to build a life on, but it's enough. It has to be. In this moment between waking and sleep, between hunger and dreams, you exist in the space where most medieval peasants spend their lives, not quite starving, but never truly satisfied, sustained by creativity, community, and the kind of stubborn endurance that keeps putting one foot in front of the other, even when the path leads nowhere but to more of the same. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of your family around you. The mice in the walls settle down. Even the wind seems to quiet, as if the world itself prepares for sleep. Tomorrow will come with its demands and its meager rewards. But for now, in this precious space of darkness and rest, you're simply another tired peasant who has fed his family for one more day. And in your world, that's enough to call this day a success. Your eyes close fully now, and you drift into dreams where bread is soft and white, where meat falls tender from the bone, where your children's bellies round with satisfaction rather than hollow with want. Let the dreams come. Morning and reality arrive soon enough. But for now, sleep. Sleep with the satisfied exhaustion of survival, of another day wrestled into submission, of love expressed through shared hunger and carefully rationed hope. Sleep, good peasant. You've earned this rest. Tomorrow's hunger will wait. And so, dear listener, as our medieval peasant family drifts off to sleep, with bellies holding just enough to see another dawn, we too prepare to close our eyes and rest. Through their eyes, we've tasted the harsh realities of survival in an age when every meal was uncertain and every morsel precious. We've seen how creativity, community, and sheer determination could transform the humblest ingredients into sustenance. How faith and folk wisdom intertwined with practical knowledge to keep families alive through winters that seemed endless and harvests that were never quite enough. Perhaps tonight, as you lie in your warm bed with your full stomach, you might spare a thought for those who came before, the countless generations who fought daily battles against hunger, so that eventually, someday, their descendants might know abundance. Their struggles built the foundation of the world we inhabit now, where food security is often taken for granted, and variety is just a refrigerator door away. As sleep begins to embrace you, let the rhythmic bubbling of that eternal pottage pot fade into the white noise of history. Let your modern worries dissolve like salt into warm broth. You're safe, you're fed, and you're ready for peaceful dreams. The medieval world, with all its hardships and small triumphs, recedes into the past where it belongs, leaving you here in your comfortable present. Sweet dreams. Dear listener, may your sleep be deep and your dreams be filled with contentment. And may you wake tomorrow with a grateful heart for the simple blessing of knowing where your next meal will come from. Rest well. You're safe now. The story is over, and morning will bring nothing more demanding than deciding what to have for breakfast from your abundant choices.